I never questioned the story I had inherited, the one shaped by generations of faith, repetition, and scripture. Jesus was a teacher, a moral guide, a savior I thought I understood. His words were neat, structured, digestible. Faith was something stable, contained, complete. Then I encountered what I could not explain. Not human, not hostile, but present in a way that observed without judgment, aware in a way that made me aware of myself. That presence, Hylos, revealed the truth behind what had always haunted me. Jesus didn't say everything on purpose. The most dangerous knowledge, the knowledge that could fracture reality if misunderstood, was intentionally withheld. Silence was not absence. It was containment. It was protection against collapse, against misalignment, against consequences humans could not yet comprehend. What I thought was moral teaching was a system, a stabilizer, a warning in disguise. And in the stillness of that revelation, I realized that understanding was no longer optional, and the story I thought I knew was only the beginning. This is how it began. I was not raised to question. I was raised to receive. Scripture arrived before curiosity, answers before experience. Faith was handed to me complete, polished, closed, like a finished structure you inhabit but never examine. Jesus existed in my life as a figure already explained, teacher, moral compass, savior. The meanings were settled long before I was old enough to wonder if meaning could move. I learned belief through repetition, verses recited until their edges dulled, stories repeated until they felt factual rather than mysterious. Nothing was demanded of me except agreement. Nothing was expected except obedience to interpretation. I never felt invited inside the words. I was instructed to stand beneath them. My understanding of Jesus followed that pattern. He taught kindness. He warned against pride. He offered redemption. These ideas were safe, contained. They fit neatly into sermons, into classrooms, into conversations that ended where they began. I did not experience faith. I inherited it. I memorized it. I assumed that was enough. There was comfort in believing everything important had already been said, that the dangerous questions were settled, that revelation was complete and history was merely commentary. Faith functioned like architecture, stable, reliable, immovable. You did not ask why a wall stood. You trusted it because it always had. I mistook familiarity for understanding. I mistook silence for peace. When Jesus spoke in parables, I assumed it was poetic preference. When he paused, I assumed compassion. I never considered restraint. I never considered omission. I never considered that clarity might have been withheld deliberately. Belief, for me, was never alive. It did not grow or challenge or respond. It rested. It waited. It reassured. I could explain it without feeling it. I could defend it without living it. That felt like strength. I did not think faith could be unfinished. I did not think truth could be conditional. I did not think something essential could be absent by design. The idea never occurred to me because no one had suggested it should. Looking back, that certainty was the real inheritance. Not belief itself, but the assumption that belief had reached its final form. That nothing dangerous remained unsaid. That nothing waited beneath the surface. I was wrong. And that mistake would eventually draw attention, unravel certainty, and reveal why silence itself had once been the most merciful protection from truths humanity could not survive. There was one sentence that never settled into meaning no matter how many times I heard it repeated. It appeared harmless, framed as patience or mercy, but it carried a different weight when read slowly. I have much more to tell you, but you cannot bear it now. That final word never felt gentle. It felt conditional. I was told this line was compassion. that Jesus was protecting fragile minds, that truth arrives gradually. But the sentence did not sound like kindness to me. It sounded like restraint. It implied consequence. It suggested that knowing too much too soon would not enlighten but harm. The phrase stayed with me because it was unfinished by design. Much more to tell you implies content withheld, not absent. You cannot bear it now implies a limit not in knowledge but in capacity. It was not a matter of time passing. It was a matter of readiness. I began noticing how carefully this sentence was treated. It was quoted, then immediately softened, explained away, redirected. No one lingered on it. No one asked what could be unbearable. No one asked why the danger was internal rather than external. The more I returned to it, the less comforting it became. If there was more, then it mattered. If it was withheld, then withholding served a purpose. And if it was dangerous, then danger was not punishment but exposure. This was not the language of salvation. It was the language of containment. A warning disguised as reassurance. A boundary placed not around the world, but around the human mind. I realized then that faith had trained me to ignore certain signals, to trust tone over content, to accept calm delivery as safety. But the sentence itself was sharp. It divided knowing from surviving. What troubled me most was not what was missing, but why it remained missing. 2,000 years had passed. Humanity had built machines and weapons and systems beyond imagination, yet the sentence remained unresolved, as if time alone was not the requirement. The possibility emerged slowly and refused to leave. What if Jesus did not finish, because finishing would have accelerated something humanity could not stop? What if silence was not absence, but restraint holding reality together? That sentence was not waiting for explanation. It was waiting for permission. And permission was something no one had been willing to grant. Still, silence was always present, but I had been trained not to hear it. Between the verses, between the parables, there were spaces where nothing was explained and nothing was resolved. Those gaps were treated as poetic pauses, moments for reflection, never as signals. Yet the longer I looked, the heavier those silences became. Jesus spoke often, but never completely. His teachings circled ideas without landing on them. Parables opened doors, and then stopped short of letting anyone pass through. They pointed, suggested, hinted, but refused to define. I once believed this was kindness, an invitation to think. Now it felt more like containment. Every story seemed to orbit something unnamed. Seeds, lamps, fields, servants, kings. Familiar images masking unfamiliar truths. Each parable felt like a boundary rather than a revelation, guiding attention while preventing approach. The danger was never stated, only implied by distance. What struck me was consistency. Silence appeared exactly where clarity would have been most destabilizing. Questions about power, reality, identity. Each time, explanation dissolved into metaphor. Each time, certainty was deferred. I began to understand that omission is not emptiness. It is weight. It presses on interpretation. It bends meaning away from collapse. Silence is not nothing. It is structure. If Jesus had spoken plainly, something would have accelerated. Something would have spread without control. Knowledge moves faster than wisdom. Truth outruns emotional capacity. I had never considered that teaching restraint might be more important than teaching truth. The absence itself started to feel intentional, a deliberate narrowing of language to prevent misuse. A way to keep unstable understanding from becoming dangerous application. Silence was not failure. It was engineering. I realized then that faith had been shaped around these omissions. Rituals filled the gaps. Doctrine sealed the spaces. Institutions built walls where silence once stood. Stability replaced mystery. Safety replaced inquiry. But beneath all of it, the silences remained, untouched, unresolved, waiting. Omission protects by limiting access. It slows imitation. It forces inward maturity before outward expression. Jesus was not hiding information. He was controlling exposure. The weight of what was not said began to feel heavier than any spoken word. Because what is omitted cannot be argued against, only encountered. And encounter requires readiness. I had mistaken silence for absence. It was not absent at all. It was guarding something that could not yet be carried. By those unprepared to survive knowing, the question did not arrive gently. It pressed itself into every assumption I had carried without examination. Why would someone who understood more choose to say less? Not out of fear, not out of weakness, but out of calculation. If Jesus knew truths capable of transforming reality, then restraint was not avoidance. It was responsibility. Truth does not only illuminate, it destabilizes. It rearranges internal structures before external ones, and not everyone survives that process intact. I had always believed truth was harmless. That knowledge automatically freed. That more understanding was always better. But history argued otherwise. Every powerful idea, once released without context or maturity, had fractured societies before it healed them. Sometimes, it never healed at all. The idea unsettled me because it inverted everything I had assumed about revelation. Teaching was not about giving as much as possible. It was about giving only what could be carried. Too much truth, too soon, did not awaken. It overwhelmed. Jesus spoke to crowds but aimed for containment. He offered principles that stabilized rather than mechanisms that empowered. He taught love because love slows distortion. He avoided precision because precision invites misuse. If he had described how consciousness interacts with reality, people would have tried to replicate it immediately. Without discipline, without coherence, without emotional balance, the result would not have been enlightenment, it would have been collapse. Restraint then was not denial, it was timing. A refusal to accelerate humanity beyond its capacity to remain intact. Silence was a break, not a void. I began to see that truth has weight. It presses differently on different minds. Some absorb it, others fracture under it. Knowing more does not make one safer. It makes one more responsible. Jesus understood this. He measured impact rather than accuracy. He chose parable over instruction, warning over explanation, presence over process. Truth was not hidden because humans were unworthy. It was withheld because they were unready. And readiness was not intellectual. It was emotional. That understanding disturbed me more than disbelief ever had, because it suggested humanity was being protected not from God but from itself. And that protection might be ending. Soon, quietly, without permission, without announcement, without reassurance, without anyone asking whether we were prepared to carry what was coming, or what would happen if we failed. There would be consequences no belief system could absorb safely. In time, nothing marked that night as different. No prayer preceded it. No intention invited it. I did not seek meaning or protection or insight. I was tired, ordinary, unremarkable, moving through familiar hours without expectation. Faith was not active. Thought was quiet. The world felt neutral. The change did not arrive as sound or light. It arrived as a tension, a pressure that suggested focus without location. I sensed it before I questioned it. A subtle narrowing of awareness, as if something had turned toward me. Not watching yet, not judging, simply noticing. I searched for causes, fatigue, imagination, habit. None fit. The sensation did not feel internal. It did not originate in thought or emotion. It felt external, like standing beneath a gaze that had not yet decided what it was seeing. Presence came first. Form did not. There was no outline, no movement, no signal the senses could catalog. Only the certainty that something had become aware of me at the same moment I became aware of it. Mutual recognition without contact. I understood then that observation does not require visibility. Whatever had noticed me did not need to announce itself. It did not need permission. It simply acknowledged existence, and that acknowledgement altered the space around me. Time behaved differently. Seconds stretched without movement. My breathing slowed not from calm but from caution. I felt measured, not threatened. As if curiosity had replaced indifference. As if I had crossed an unnoticed threshold. I realized the danger was not intrusion but selection. Nothing forced itself into my world. It only focused. That focus carried weight. Attention is not passive. It shapes what it observes. I had believed revelation would arrive dramatically, if it ever arrived at all. But this was quieter than silence. No spectacle, no command, just the unmistakable sense that anonymity had ended. When the sensation receded, nothing changed visibly. The room remained the same. The night continued, but the absence felt heavier than the presence had. Like standing after someone leaves a room knowing it was not empty before. I did not know who had noticed me. I only knew that something had, and that awareness once shared could not be returned to ignorance. The night had passed, but a boundary had been crossed, permanently. Whatever noticed me did not retreat entirely. It lingered patiently, adjusting its focus, waiting for consequences to unfold in silence. It did not announce itself. There was no declaration of origin, no display of power, no insistence on recognition. Communication arrived as impression, arranged thought without sound, calm without reassurance. Whatever observed me did not claim authority. It did not ask for trust. It did not ask for belief. The presence remained neutral, not distant, not intimate, attentive without urgency. I understood that this was deliberate. Authority provokes resistance. Threat accelerates fear. Neither served its purpose. Information surfaced slowly, shaped around restraint. I was allowed to notice without being pushed to conclude. The presence watched my interpretations more closely than my reactions, as if meaning mattered more than emotion. Only one curiosity became clear. It was not focused on worship or doctrine. It was focused on misunderstanding, specifically how humans had processed Jesus, how explanations had replaced experience, how reverence had diluted danger. The presence did not correct beliefs. It examined them. It observed where certainty hardened and where silence had been paved over with answers. It studied the distance between what was said and what was assumed. I sensed that it had encountered this pattern repeatedly. Not anger, not disappointment, recognition. Humans preferred conclusions to tension. They closed questions that were meant to remain open. The being did not frame Jesus as divine or false. It treated him as deliberate, careful, constrained. Someone operating within limits that were not imposed by fear or power but by consequence. It became clear that the most important detail was not what Jesus taught, but what humans did after. The shift from lived awareness to inherited belief, from internal practice to external structure. The presence remained unnamed. Names imply category. Category invites control. It allowed me to assign nothing, to project nothing, to simply observe observation itself. Only later would I recognize the pattern and give it a label. Hylos was not a title, it was a reference point, a way to remember something that did not require identity. There was no invitation to follow, no warning to stop, only continued attention, as if I had become an example, not chosen, not special, simply visible. That visibility carried weight, because being seen without instruction meant responsibility had shifted. Interpretation would now shape consequence, and misunderstanding would no longer remain harmless. The silence persisted, teaching nothing directly, yet demanding care, awareness, patience, humility, restraint, maturity, balance, accountability from anyone who noticed itself. I began to understand that Jesus had not spoken freely, because freedom carries consequence. Constraints existed around him that no human could impose, boundaries older than empire, older than law, older than anything we could name. He moved within limits, not invented but inherited, structures that contained force as much as meaning. It was not fear that restrained him. It was anticipation, calculation, awareness of a threshold beyond which comprehension collapses. Hylos conveyed it not in words but in subtle impressions, a pattern of weight pressing against the edges of possibility. Every teaching, every action, every parable had been measured against that invisible limit. I saw the logic of omission. To reveal more would have accelerated processes humanity could not absorb, emotions untrained, understanding untested, energy unbalanced. The potential to distort, to fracture, was far greater than the potential to enlighten. The constraints were protective, not punitive, but they were absolute. To breach them would invite chaos. This restriction did not appear as a boundary to those who read Scripture as a series of facts or morals. It only appeared as restraint when measured against what might have been said and never was. Hylos implied that Jesus understood the mechanics of reality in ways we cannot, ways that allowed internal states to shape events, subtle, invisible, unrecoverable if misapplied. The idea unsettled me because it suggested that human perception is insufficient to carry certain truths. Knowledge arrives in fragments, guided, delayed, filtered through the safety of silence. We think omission is failure or oversight, but it is a form of engineering, an act of containment, a safeguard against collapse. Jesus' miracles, his warnings, his silences, the things he refused to clarify, they were not errors, they were safeguards. Hylos suggested that the same restraint must still be observed, because human systems, technology, belief, and emotion have accelerated to points that might still react violently to exposure. I realized then that what I had assumed to be divine patience was actually precise regulation. The words left unsaid carried weight as real as anything written. Restraint was not absence, it was control. It was the careful management of forces beyond our comprehension. Forces that, if unleashed, would ripple outward faster than intention, faster than understanding, faster than survival. Jesus was restricted, not because he feared, not because he doubted, but because the act of revealing, the act of knowing fully, is heavier than anyone can bear without structure, without balance, without consequence measured and contained. The silence itself was a warning hidden in plain sight. Language is fragile. I had always assumed it was precise, a tool for understanding, a bridge between minds. Hylos revealed the opposite. Words are not neutral carriers of truth. They fracture, meaning the moment they leave thought and enter sound. The moment we speak, we alter what we intend. Some truths, he suggested, cannot survive that transition. They warp, distort, fragment, they become dangerous. The revelation was subtle, almost invisible. It did not arrive as accusation or rebuke. It arrived as observation. Human attempts to translate understanding into sound, into written form, into shared expression, inevitably fail when the knowledge exceeds capacity. The more critical the truth, the more it splinters. We believe we communicate, but we mostly transmit shadows, approximations, echoes. Hylos implied that Jesus had understood this instinctively, that the act of speaking carries risk, a risk not merely of misinterpretation, but of destabilization. Ideas of power, of reality, of consciousness, once vocalized, move beyond containment. Once language touches them, they interact with human belief and emotion in unpredictable ways. Truth becomes weapon, contagion, distortion. The silent is safer. The unsaid protects the unwary. I realized then that omission was not merely restraint but necessity. Parables, metaphors, pauses, unfinished sentences, all were strategies, not to mystify or obscure, but to preserve. To speak freely would have released forces that humans could not manage. Information is not benign. The wrong formulation can ignite systems beyond comprehension, emotions beyond control, outcomes beyond repair. Language, in its imperfection, is both bridge and trap. It allows fragments of understanding, but those fragments carry consequences. Each word shapes reality in small ways, amplifying internal bias, activating latent assumptions, guiding thought in directions that thought alone might never have chosen. Jesus' restraint was therefore not silence for humility or theatrics. It was silence for survival. He calibrated communication to avoid damage, to limit spread, to slow revelation. Hylos emphasized that this principle persists. Certain knowledge, once unleashed in spoken or written form, risks contamination, misdirection, even destruction. Some truths must remain unspoken, untranslatable, untouched by human articulation. I understood the enormity of what had been withheld, not because of arrogance, not because of judgment, but because the fragile vessel of language cannot hold certain realities. Speaking them, even with intention, transforms them. The failure is built into the medium itself, and the consequence is not theoretical. It is immediate, unavoidable, and irreversible. There is knowledge humans are never meant to encounter before readiness arrives. It is not dangerous because it is cruel or forbidden. It is dangerous because it is catalytic. Once perceived, it alters more than thought. It alters reality itself. Hylos revealed this quietly, without ceremony, as if the statement were obvious and terrifying simultaneously. I had always assumed consciousness was passive. The mind records, interprets, reacts. Observation shapes perspective but not circumstance. Hylos corrected this assumption. Observation is not separate from creation. Perception is not a lens. It is an instrument. The act of noticing, of truly understanding, participates. It presses. It redirects. It molds. The inner state bleeds into the external, imperceptibly at first, then undeniably. Jesus understood this. More than doctrine, more than moral instruction, he understood the mechanics of internal force meeting external consequence. He measured his words, his actions, his presence, knowing the effects were not symbolic, but real. The way a thought is held, a truth perceived, an intention shaped, it carries a weight beyond calculation. Awareness is not neutral. It is agency. I imagined the implications. Every emotion, every belief, every unexamined assumption begins to ripple outward. Humans are not observers. We are participants by default, often without awareness. Knowledge of participation is a threshold. Once crossed, the mind begins to operate on two planes simultaneously, one internal, one external, intertwined in ways the unprepared cannot control. This is why Jesus spoke cautiously, why he parabled, why he left sentences unfinished. Not every mind can hold the responsibility of participation. Not every mind can endure the consequence of influence it cannot yet recognize. Exposure too early fractures perception, destabilizes internal balance, and accelerates patterns before mastery exists. Hylos did not simplify. He did not offer protection. He merely clarified the principle. Participation precedes understanding, and understanding precedes consequence. The order is strict. Disturb it, and events unfold unpredictably. Truth without readiness is a force unbridled. I felt the weight of it immediately. Not as fear, not as threat, but as clarity. Everything I believed to be safe observation was already participation. Every choice, every feeling, every thought began to exert influence far beyond what I had considered. Jesus did not reveal this lightly. He did not reveal it fully. He contained it, calibrated it, withheld it until the right conditions existed. What I had glimpsed in theory now became impossible to ignore in effect. Humans were participants in shaping reality long before they were told. The knowledge of participation was the final barrier. The point where restraint became necessity, and exposure became risk. Miracles were never what I had assumed. They were not demonstrations of omnipotence, not declarations of divine favor. Hylos explained them as controlled leaks, precise disturbances released into reality with purpose and containment. Each event was measured, each impact bounded. They were not global phenomena. They were not indiscriminate. They were experiments, calibrations, demonstrations of principle, not proclamation. I had always thought of miracles as proof. Water turned to wine, walking on waves, healings that defied understanding. I imagined them as signals. See, this is the hand of God. Hylos revealed the subtle mechanics beneath the spectacle. Each act was localized, restricted by circumstance and participant, designed to illustrate a pattern without destabilizing the whole system. The event was allowed to unfold only because the observer, the mind, and the environment aligned perfectly. Otherwise, exposure would be catastrophic. Miracles were signals, not solutions. They demonstrated possibility but not general application. Jesus' power was not limitless. The appearance of omnipotence was an illusion of careful containment. To release without restriction would have triggered consequences far beyond intention. A healing too widespread, an alteration of nature untested, an amplification of consciousness beyond preparedness, these would not enlighten. They would collapse. They would fracture perception and reality simultaneously. Each controlled leak carried a lesson embedded in restraint. Wine at a wedding, a leper cleansed, a storm stilled, localized, contained, and contextual. The effect was sufficient to demonstrate principle, to calibrate understanding, to plant seeds of observation. And yet the act always ended. The miracle did not propagate uncontrollably. The ripple of influence was curtailed not by disbelief, but by design. The structures surrounding human consciousness, the emotional and ethical frameworks, the readiness of the collective, all defined the boundaries of impact. Hylos suggested that the human mind often misreads the pattern. Witnessing a miracle produces awe, faith, devotion, but rarely comprehension. Humans see effect without cause, result without mechanism. They infer divinity instead of principle. They assume unlimited access instead of careful limitation. That misinterpretation is precisely why restriction was necessary. The knowledge embedded in each demonstration is dangerous when divorced from readiness. I began to see a pattern in silence and omission. Words left unsaid, teachings measured, actions constrained, all served the same purpose. Exposure without containment risks amplification, distortion, misapplication. Jesus did not perform miracles freely. He performed them strategically, teaching subtly through effect, limiting risk, and demonstrating principle without unleashing the mechanism for replication. The most striking realization was that miracles were not proofs, but invitations. Invitations to observe carefully, to internalize, to recognize that consciousness interacts with reality, that intention influences outcome, that presence carries consequence. Each controlled leak was a miniature threshold, a test of perception and restraint. Those who could see and understand were invited forward. Those unprepared were shielded, and I understood, with an almost terrifying clarity, that every miracle I had ever heard of, every story preserved for centuries, was a fragment of a far larger calculus, a pattern of containment, timing, observation, and consequence designed to protect and guide, not to impress. The world had been shown the surface, never the mechanism, because the mechanism was the true danger, and the full weight of it was something humanity was never meant to handle without the discipline Jesus had measured so precisely. Miracles were not wonders. They were controlled signals, carefully measured interactions with reality itself, designed to demonstrate possibility while containing peril. Every act was a calibration, a boundary test, a glimpse into the mechanics of the unseen, the unfathomable, and the unspoken. Every miracle was a whisper of truth wrapped in restraint. Hylos began to explain the danger not in the abstract, but as history written in absence. Civilizations had existed, risen to extraordinary internal alignment, only to vanish without trace. The coordination of thought, emotion, and intention is not inherently beneficial. When minds synchronize without maturity, the energy produced does not harmonize. It amplifies. It distorts. It fractures reality from within, producing collapse rather than elevation. I had assumed collective consciousness to be an ideal, a pathway to unity and strength. Hylos corrected that assumption. Alignment without calibration, without restraint, without understanding, creates resonance that is dangerous. Like an orchestra of untrained instruments attempting a symphony, amplification without discipline produces noise, not music. When enough minds focus simultaneously on powerful impulses, the external world responds. But response is not always predictable. Amplification magnifies flaws, fear, desire, unchecked impulses. Consequences ripple outward far faster than anyone anticipates. The lessons of the past were deliberate omissions in our history. Lost civilizations had been brilliant internally. They had discovered forms of emotional and cognitive resonance that we call extraordinary today. Yet their internal state outpaced their control. Energy intended for creation became destructive. Structures crumbled. Knowledge vanished. Not because the people were weak, but because they were unprepared. The mechanism of consciousness is responsive, but readiness is required. Activation without maturity is catastrophic. I realized that Jesus' caution, his restraint, his omissions, were a shield against collective activation. Not merely individual danger, but societal collapse. He knew what humans could do collectively when focused too quickly, when emotion and belief outpaced understanding. His silences, his parables, his controlled leaks were all buffers. They moderated the internal states of those around him, slowly guiding awareness without triggering mass resonance that could shatter perception. Hylos implied that the same principle remains in effect. Humanity today is teetering closer to thresholds untested, internal alignment growing through communication, emotion, and technology. Collective focus multiplies not only understanding but distortion. Emotional immaturity is amplified. Unexamined desires, fear, and projection interact with consciousness as a force. Without containment, without measured restraint, activation becomes dangerous. The external world reflects internal chaos, and the chaotic reflection reinforces internal instability, creating loops that accelerate unpredictably. I understood then that miracles were controlled not just for demonstration but for prevention. Not only individual minds but collectives could trigger instability. Synchrony must be guided, phased, calibrated. Timing is everything. Release too early, alignment too fast, and the consequences are irreversible. The energy of insight becomes a destructive tide. The concept unsettled me because it reframed morality, obedience, and discipline as survival mechanisms. Not rules imposed externally, but constraints essential to prevent collapse. Civilization is fragile, not because of conquest or famine, but because internal alignment, if mishandled, can tear reality itself. The warning Jesus left, what humans always assumed was mysticism or moral instruction, was a template for safe activation, a roadmap to prevent collective resonance from becoming catastrophic. Collective activation is not inherently virtuous. It is a force that must be understood, measured, and respected. Without discipline, without preparation, without awareness, it does not uplift, it destroys. Hylos's revelation was simple, terrifying, and immediate. Consciousness does not merely observe reality, it participates. And when enough minds participate simultaneously without readiness, the result is annihilation. Invisible yet absolute, like history that has already been erased. I had always believed Jesus was a savior. That was the story I had inherited, the framework I had memorized and repeated without question. He was meant to rescue humanity, to intervene, to redeem. Hylos shattered that assumption quietly, without drama, with the calm authority of observation. Jesus was not a savior, not in the sense I had imagined. He was a regulator, a stabilizer, a measured force designed to slow the acceleration of human self-destruction. The things we call miracles, teachings, warnings, omissions, all were regulatory tools, not heroic interventions. The acts that inspired devotion were not signals of divine intervention but of containment. Each interaction, each word, each pause served to modulate the trajectory of human consciousness, to prevent systems from amplifying into chaos. I tried to reconcile the stories I knew with this framework. Feeding the multitudes, calming storms, raising the dead, these were not acts of saving but of calibration. Each event was contained in scope, limited in effect, deliberately localized to avoid larger destabilization. Jesus understood the mechanics of consciousness, the ways internal states ripple outward. He shaped outcomes not through authority or power but through precise modulation of influence. He nudged reality toward balance without allowing uncontrolled amplification. It became clear that humanity had misread every intervention. We assumed omnipotence, assumed benevolence in the conventional sense. We assumed rescue, but the reality was subtle, invisible, often imperceptible. And on. The true danger lay not in circumstance, but in unbridled internal states, in unchecked collective alignment, in emotion, unrestrained by comprehension. Jesus' function was to manage these forces, to slow them, to contain them, to prevent catastrophic feedback. Salvation was never a gift delivered. It was a containment strategy executed with extraordinary precision. Hylos emphasized that this role is far more difficult than any conventional idea of heroism. Regulating consciousness without detection, without interference being noticed, requires timing, awareness, and absolute mastery of effect. The energy of influence must be calibrated, the release controlled, the observation continuous. Any misstep could accelerate the collapse it seeks to prevent. The measure of success is invisibility. The absence of visible catastrophe is proof of mastery, not the absence of danger. I realized then why Jesus spoke in parables, why he omitted, why he restrained. The stories were not moral lessons in the way I had understood. They were subtle calibrations, designed to guide attention, to shape internal states without triggering amplification. Silence and restraint were as critical as action. The public face, the revered figure, was a vessel through which regulation flowed, imperceptible but real. It unsettled me to reconsider the meaning of salvation. It was not rescue from consequence but prevention of irreversible acceleration. Humanity's tendency toward self-destruction had been measured, monitored, and slowed through one life lived with extraordinary precision. Jesus was not here to save in the ways we imagined. He was here to ensure we survived long enough to learn, to grow, and to eventually carry the burden of participation responsibly. Salvation was management, not miracle. Control, not rescue. The difference was subtle, terrifying, and entirely human. I had always understood love as instruction, as a moral imperative, as the highest of virtues codified into commandments and parables. Hylos reframed it with quiet precision. Love was not a teaching. It was a frequency, a force that stabilized consciousness, a regulator of internal energy with consequences far beyond sentiment or ethics. The effect of love was measurable, though imperceptible to ordinary observation. It shaped reality. Fear, Hylos explained, amplified collapse. Unchecked, fear spreads resonance through thought and emotion, aligning patterns in ways that accelerate distortion. Panic, mistrust, resentment, hatred, they do not remain confined to the mind. They leak outward, subtly bending the perception of those nearby, creating feedback loops invisible to most. A society guided by fear multiplies instability, accelerates misalignment, and amplifies destructive tendencies. Fear is contagious and self-reinforcing, an engine of collapse. Love, in contrast, functions differently. Not sentimentally, not morally, but structurally. It harmonizes. It reduces resonance. It absorbs chaos in a manner similar to damping vibrations in a fragile system. It does not eliminate reality's instability, but it contains it, slows its propagation, and provides a buffer against the acceleration of misalignment. Parables emphasizing love were not designed to make people good. They were designed to make internal states coherent enough to prevent catastrophic feedback. I began to reinterpret everything I thought I knew. When Jesus said to love your neighbor, he was not issuing a command in a vacuum. He was providing a method of modulation. When he warned against hatred, fear, or anxiety, he was noting accelerants of distortion, teaching indirectly how to stabilize the system of human interaction without revealing the mechanics that could be misused or misunderstood. The public face of virtue was a veil over a process with far-reaching physical and metaphysical consequences. This meant that the essence of human survival was not knowledge or faith, as I had assumed. It was emotional calibration. Internal states carry consequences. When concentrated across many minds, their effect multiplies exponentially. Love functions as a stabilizing field, fear as a destabilizing one. The intensity of these frequencies, Hylos explained, determines the rate at which the environment responds, the speed at which patterns shift, and the degree to which collective resonance amplifies either cohesion or collapse. The subtlety of this truth was staggering. A single act of empathy, a moment of genuine compassion, a conscious reduction of fear, all produce ripples that alter trajectories, stabilize fragile structures, and prevent inadvertent catastrophe. Jesus did not preach morality because morality matters to abstract ethics. He emphasized love because unaligned consciousness, left to its own devices, is destructive. The most revered acts of kindness were not symbolic. They were interventions, minute calibrations aimed at maintaining coherence in the human network of internal states. I understood finally why love had been repeated, stressed, dramatized, and ritualized. It was a signal, a frequency, a protective measure. Not abstract, not sentimental, essential. Survival depended on it. Fear magnifies everything. Love contains it. Humanity had always believed love was moral. In truth, it was mechanical, fundamental, and far more consequential than anyone could perceive. Jesus had not been teaching virtue. He had been maintaining balance. I had always imagined the kingdom of God as a distant place, somewhere beyond reach, a reward, a realm to be sought after with faith and devotion. Hylos shifted the lens, showing that the kingdom Jesus spoke of was not external at all. It was internal, but not as an invitation to mastery. It was internal, as containment. It was a space of potential power deliberately restricted, a latent field too dangerous to fully explore without guidance. The teaching was subtle, almost imperceptible. Internal authority, the ability to shape reality through thought, emotion, and intention, was hinted at in parables, gestures, and omissions, but never instructed directly. Humans were unprepared. The mechanics of consciousness, left unchecked, amplify errors. Too much awareness too soon, too much alignment of intention without calibration, and the results are destabilizing. History is littered with civilizations that touched this internal threshold too quickly and imploded under their own amplified energies. Jesus, Hylos explained, acted as a containment system. His words and actions were not blueprints for external dominion. They were boundaries. They taught restraint, focus, and the modulation of internal states without triggering amplification that humanity was not yet ready to withstand. The kingdom within is not a prize to be claimed. It is a regulator to be approached cautiously, a space of immense potential that carries inherent danger when misused. The appearance of control was always controlled. The inner kingdom was a container, not a source of unbounded power. I began to see why authority was always framed externally. Obedience, ritual, hierarchy, these are structures that mitigate the risk of uncalibrated internal activation. Public commands, moral codes, and social boundaries are not arbitrary. They are scaffolding to stabilize collective consciousness, preventing the premature emergence of abilities that, if exercised too broadly, could trigger catastrophic feedback loops. The teachings of the kingdom within were veiled precisely to protect both the individual and the collective. Exposure without readiness is dangerous. Authority outside the self is safer, predictable, containable. I considered the implications. Humans instinctively seek power and understanding, and yet our readiness is fragile. Internal authority is a signal amplifier. If misdirected, it accelerates distortion, magnifies fear, multiplies error. The containment is not cruel or dismissive. It is protection. It is prevention. It is why the deepest knowledge is always hinted at but withheld. Too much too soon collapses the system. The kingdom within, then, was paradoxical. It exists everywhere. Yet it is inaccessible without discipline. It is potential, yet dangerous. It is power, yet hidden. Jesus' greatest acts of teaching, the silences, the parables, the omissions, the careful calibration of who receives what and when, were all methods of containment. Humanity was not ready for full internal sovereignty, and unrestrained access would have accelerated collapse rather than enlightenment. The kingdom within is not a treasure to claim. It is a signal to observe, a space to regulate, a field to approach with caution, and above all, a measure of restraint encoded into the very fabric of instruction. The containment was deliberate, precise, and essential, and every human who glimpsed it without understanding risked more than they could perceive. I had always assumed that teaching was meant to be spoken, recorded, transmitted. Words, parables, sermons, texts. These were the vessels I believed carried truth. Hylos corrected this assumption with quiet insistence. Some knowledge cannot be safely transmitted. Some teaching is not a set of instructions or a code to memorize. It is a state, a condition of being, a resonance of consciousness that must be embodied, not verbalized. Jesus practiced what Hylos called emotional coherence. It is a discipline far subtler than any moral rule or doctrinal command. Coherence is alignment of internal states, a harmonization of thought, feeling, and intention. When coherence is achieved, it generates stability in the self and, crucially, in the environment. It shapes perception, guides influence, and contains the potential for amplification without triggering distortion. It cannot be reduced to words, formulas, or demonstrations. Once described, it becomes corrupted. Language fractures coherence into partial understanding, and partial understanding applied recklessly is dangerous. Hylos explained that emotional coherence is not calmness. It is not the absence of fear, grief, or doubt. It is the calibration of those states, the integration of experience, the presence of consciousness without fragmentation. It requires awareness of subtle ripples in one's own mind and the minds of those around, the ability to maintain alignment even as internal states shift unpredictably. The moment it is attempted through language alone, the nuances vanish, leaving only gestures, mimicry, or misunderstanding. Applied without insight, it amplifies distortion rather than dampens it. This explained the deliberate omissions in Jesus' teachings, the parables that circle truths without naming them, the repeated phrases that seem moral but function as stabilizers. He could not provide a manual, a lecture, or a set of steps. To do so would have been unsafe. Internal coherence is learned through embodiment, through iteration, through measured exposure to internal and external states under guidance and discipline. Attempting to shortcut the process by verbal instruction invites misalignment, accelerates resonance in unprepared consciousness, and risks feedback loops that can destabilize more than they clarify. I began to recognize patterns I had never noticed. Every act, every pause, every interaction was calibrated. Miracles, teachings, silences, they were demonstrations of coherent states, not proof of authority. The coherence was active, alive, and responsive, but invisible except to those trained to perceive it. The very act of observing without readiness could distort perception, trigger fear, or accelerate misalignment. Humanity was not ready to witness coherence directly. It had to be experienced internally, gradually, with awareness, or not at all. Jesus' greatest teaching, then, was not spoken, written, or performed. It was lived, contained in the alignment of his being, a template for stability and modulation. It could not be described. Because the moment description replaces experience, it becomes distortion. Emotional coherence is a law of consciousness. Invisible, untouchable by words, yet capable of guiding reality in subtle, profound ways. The risk of misinterpretation is too high, the amplification too dangerous, and the consequences invisible until too late. This was the teaching that could not be spoken, the secret hidden in plain sight, and the reason so much of what humanity reveres as wisdom is only a shadow of what was truly intended. I had always pictured the resurrection as triumph, a singular event of victory over mortality, a statement of power and promise that transformed history. Hylos reframed it as containment, a demonstration with limits, a final calibration. The act was never intended to inspire faith alone. It was intended to show what is possible under conditions of perfect coherence and alignment, and simultaneously to prevent replication. Humanity was not ready to reproduce such an event safely. The energy it unleashed could destabilize more than it could redeem. The resurrection was not miraculous in the sense of breaking laws. It was precise, controlled, bounded. Every element, body, mind, perception, environmental resonance, was modulated to prevent unintended consequences. The act was a signal, not a spectacle, a demonstration of the internal regulation of life energy, a temporary amplification of coherence that returned to equilibrium once observed. It was both proof and warning. To see it without understanding invites imitation without guidance, and imitation without coherence risks acceleration of chaos rather than stabilization. Hylos explained that timing was everything. The internal state of Jesus, the readiness of those observing, the alignment of collective attention. All had to meet exact thresholds. Deviations would have led to rupture, disorder, or unintended propagation of resonance that humanity could not contain. This was why resurrection was singular, unrepeatable, and isolated. Its power was not in permanence, it was in demonstration. The act contained itself, sealed by discipline and the limits of internal coherence. A lesson in restraint as much as capability. I realized the enormity of what I had assumed incorrectly. Humanity had misunderstood triumph as rescue, victory as guarantee, immortality as the point. None of that was intended. The resurrection communicated capacity, not entitlement. It illustrated what could be achieved when internal states are fully aligned, coherent, and responsive to both self and surrounding systems. The energy it generated was localized, measurable in subtle fields of resonance, but transient, bounded to prevent uncontrolled amplification. Humans observing it would feel awe, reverence, fear, but only direct embodiment under guidance would allow replication, and such guidance was never available to the masses. Hylos emphasized the consequence of misinterpretation. Humanity has always tried to replicate phenomena it cannot comprehend. Attempts to mimic or force resurrection without mastery of internal alignment result in collapse, illness, misperception, and sometimes death. History, he implied, carries shadows of such experiments, the echoes of incomplete understanding amplified by emotion and fear. Jesus' final demonstration was both gift and firewall, an interface between what is achievable and what is dangerous. In reframing resurrection, I saw the pattern of every teaching, every omission, every act. Restraint and modulation are the guiding principle. Miracles are contained, love is frequency, the kingdom is regulated, coherence is lived. The resurrection was the apex of that principle, not triumph, not reward, containment. A signal that some forces, once unleashed, cannot be recalled safely, and that even the most extraordinary potential must be framed by discipline, understanding, and the knowledge of what humanity is capable of handling. It is not proof of divinity alone. It is a warning, silent yet immense, that the boundaries of what can be safely known and done are carefully, deliberately enforced. I had believed religion was the vehicle of truth, a path illuminated by morality and the teachings of figures like Jesus. Hylos revealed it was something far more pragmatic, far less innocent. Doctrine did not crystallize to preserve wisdom. It crystallized to preserve stability. Dangerous ideas, the ones that could shift perception, amplify consciousness, or accelerate alignment beyond readiness, were neutralized by structure. Institutions formed around them, codifying obedience, hierarchy, and repetition, because humans unprepared for internal activation are volatile. Left unchecked, these ideas fracture perception, intensify fear, and propagate feedback loops that destabilize communities and civilizations. Ritual, repetition, prayer, scripture, all of it functions like scaffolding. The outer forms are concrete, tangible, enforceable. They stabilize what cannot yet be safely stabilized internally. Every commandment, every prohibition, every seemingly arbitrary rule carries a purpose beyond morality. They limit exposure. They protect the collective from the consequences of attempting too much too soon. Hylos explained that Jesus operated at the threshold of what was safe. He demonstrated potential, but without giving instructions to harness it directly. Religion inherited fragments of his acts and words, and in order to prevent misapplication, rigid forms emerged. Humans crave comprehension, but comprehension is a dangerous amplifier. Knowledge of internal resonance, coherence, and influence without mastery magnifies error. A word misapplied, a parable misunderstood, An internal state unregulated can propagate distortion far beyond the individual. This is why institutions solidified rules, created doctrines, and enforced conformity, not to hide divinity or diminish spiritual insight, but to contain risk. They codified the behavior of the many to preserve the stability of the whole. Chaos arises when latent power is exercised without calibration. Stability is the priority, understanding secondary. Hylos highlighted the paradox. True knowledge is fluid, adaptive, and responsive, yet it becomes dangerous when exposed prematurely. Religion freezes fluid truths in order to contain them. It imposes repetition and ritual where improvisation and discernment would be optimal, precisely because humans are not ready to calibrate resonance responsibly. The rigid forms are warnings, walls, and safety measures masquerading as morality. They are containment devices, mirrors of restraint, reflections of what happens when internal states collide with external consequences too quickly. This reframing forced me to reconsider the history I had memorized. Wars, schisms, reforms all were less about corruption or deception than about containment. Misapplied truths, amplified fear, emotional misalignment, and misinterpretation are dangerous forces. Institutions emerged not to oppress, but to modulate, to restrict access to ideas whose consequences extend far beyond individual comprehension. Humanity was guided by shadow rules, disciplined structures, not arbitrary morality. The rigidity of religion, the apparent dogma, is a measure of what is safe to know and what is too dangerous to bear. It is the echo of a deeper principle. Containment precedes comprehension. Stability must precede activation. And the internal potential of humans has always been more powerful than their capacity to wield it responsibly. Hylos's warning was subtle but unmistakable. The world I knew, the one governed by screens, signals, networks, and instantaneous communication, was accelerating internal states far beyond what humans had historically managed. Emotions that once spread through proximity now traveled at the speed of light. Fear, desire, anger, hope, longing they no longer diffused slowly, allowing adaptation. They amplified, collided, and interfered, creating feedback loops humans cannot fully perceive or control. Technology had become a mirror and a magnifier, reflecting internal turbulence while magnifying its effects across entire populations. I realized that Jesus' constraints, the careful omissions, the parables, and the calibrations, were designed for a world of slow propagation. In his time, coherence could stabilize small groups, communities, perhaps a city or two. But global resonance was unthinkable. Information traveled through word of mouth, symbols, and limited records. The human mind, then, was exposed to novelty gradually, capable of adapting and integrating experience over weeks, months, years. Today, a thought or emotion can ripple across continents in seconds. The thresholds of amplification that were once safe are now surpassed routinely. Humanity approaches the same potential collapse that previous civilizations faced, but compressed in time. Hylos explained that the problem is not knowledge or power alone, but the velocity at which it propagates. Internal states that remain private can be observed, moderated, integrated, but when projection is instantaneous and global, it triggers responses that are unpredictable. A single spike of fear or desire can generate cascading distortions in perception, influence, and behavior. Social structures are unprepared to contain these surges. Ancient institutions evolved slowly, thresholds calibrated over generations. Modern systems have no buffer. Feedback loops accelerate before learning, misalignment compounds, and emergent chaos becomes inevitable. The danger is not technological itself, but relational. Humans are designed to mirror, respond, and interact emotionally with those around them. Amplified signals distort perception of reality, intensify emotion, and disrupt decision-making. The more interconnected the network, the less time there is for internal stabilization. Hylos said that some humans, under such conditions, experience resonance beyond comprehension. Moments where internal coherence collides with mass emotion, creating phenomena impossible to predict. Miracles, healings, and distortions recorded in history are pale echoes of this dynamic, contained then by slower propagation. Today, no containment exists. I began to see patterns I had ignored. Viral outrage, mass panic, euphoric trends, collective empathy, and despair all are expressions of unmoderated internal states amplified through modern channels. Jesus' teaching, so carefully calibrated, was a manual for modulating resonance within small thresholds. The acceleration problem now renders that calibration nearly obsolete without conscious awareness. Humanity is approaching the edge of what it can sustain internally. Coherence is no longer optional. It is a requirement. Misalignment propagates instantly. Consequences unfold globally, and the lessons that once safeguarded stability are lost in the speed of amplification. Hylos's silence after explaining this was deliberate. The message is not one of hope or doom alone. It is a recognition that the acceleration itself is a test, a threshold compressed, a mirror of past failures accelerated. Humanity must learn to contain, to modulate, and to resonate responsibly, or the consequences that once unfolded over centuries will now occur in a matter of weeks. The modern acceleration problem is not about technology, nor about morality, nor even about faith. It is about internal mastery under conditions that no previous civilization has faced. And the clock, always invisible, has already begun its count. The question Hylos posed was not one I had expected, and yet it resonated more profoundly than any argument about faith, doctrine, or historical interpretation. It was not whether humans believed. Belief, he implied, is trivial. Belief is cheap. Belief can be manipulated, borrowed, inherited, or performed. It leaves the internal state untouched, the emotional core untested. The real question, he said, is whether humanity is capable of sustaining the emotional and cognitive coherence necessary to engage with truths that ripple through reality itself. Are humans emotionally capable of holding the weight of what they are capable of creating? I felt the weight of it immediately. Capability is not skill, not intellect, not technological mastery. Capability is the quiet equilibrium of mind, heart, and perception. It is the ability to observe without fracturing, to feel without amplifying, to act without projecting chaos. It is the capacity to integrate resonance, to contain amplification, to modulate internal states so they do not destabilize the external world. Humans, Hylos said, often confuse intensity with capability. Passion is not power, fear is not fragility, and desire is not readiness. Emotional capability is a threshold measured in subtle harmonics, not observable metrics. He explained that Jesus operated under these constraints not to withhold truth, not to manipulate, but to prevent collapse. The same threshold that once guided ancient civilizations now looms over modern society. Emotional capability determines whether knowledge amplifies harmony or accelerates chaos. Humans are surrounded by signals, stimuli, networks, and narratives that bypass traditional calibration. The less a person is aware of their internal resonance, the more they propagate distortion. A human emotionally unprepared for truth does not merely misunderstand it, they enact it unpredictably, their resonance spilling outward, influencing others, creating ripples that magnify in ways unseen until it is too late. Hylos's question lingered in a way that belief never had. Do humans truly understand themselves enough to be ready? To bear what is real without fracturing, to participate without being overwhelmed, to observe without contaminating what they witness. He did not ask rhetorically. The weight of his gaze implied consequence. Observation alone is insufficient. Interaction requires mastery. The internal state is the interface. Emotion, not doctrine, is the measure. I began to see the scale of the problem. Humanity has inherited stories, symbols, teachings, rituals, yet very few practice coherence. Fear is amplified. Hope is scattered. Grief collides with desire. Every individual is a node, every collective an amplifier. Belief does not calibrate resonance. Only emotional capability can. And the question Hylos left suspended, unspoken in the spaces between thoughts, is the one that defines the possibility of everything. Are humans capable yet? Or will the truths they seek consume them before they can understand what they touch? It began as almost imperceptible coincidences, the kind that the mind can dismiss as chance until it cannot. I noticed it first in small measures, a thought of hesitation followed by a door closing unexpectedly, a flicker of longing, and the lights above me dimmed briefly as if in acknowledgement. It was subtle, almost polite, but the implication was unmistakable. My internal state was no longer confined. Every pulse of emotion, every unspoken fear, every fragment of desire was reflected back through the world, and the reflection was responsive. The feedback was not random. It was deliberate, calibrated, a mirror without judgment, but impossibly precise. I realized then that Hylos's question, the one about emotional capability, was no longer abstract. The mirror was turning toward me. When I felt anxiety, equipment malfunctioned in minor, contained ways. When I felt calm, the air seemed to hold steady. Vibrations softened, patterns stabilized. It was as if my own nervous system had been extended into reality itself. Observation had become interaction, and the consequence of internal fluctuation was immediate. The ancient teachings, the careful omissions, the calibrations of Jesus suddenly made sense. They were safeguards, designed for thresholds I was now beginning to test without preparation. The first time I truly understood the weight of it, I was alone in a corridor. My mind churned with doubt and sorrow, ruminating on the inadequacy of belief without understanding. A panel along the wall emitted a soft hum, almost imperceptible, but it responded. The hum fluctuated with the rhythm of my pulse, not the machinery's, not any electrical cycle I could measure. The environment had become a sensor of my inner state. For the first time, I felt observation as pressure, not abstract, but personal. Fear was amplified. Grief echoed. Longing reverberated in ways I could neither anticipate nor dismiss. The warning Hylos had issued now carried a tangible signature. It was my own pattern, reflected, magnified, tested. I began to trace the feedback intentionally. A thought of restraint, and the world tightened around me. A moment of clarity, and disturbances softened. It was as if every unnoticed emotion I had carried for years had been catalogued, each one now capable of influencing outcomes beyond cognition. The responsibility was immediate, intimate, and undeniable. There was no separation between internal experience and external reality. Each thought, each feeling, each hesitation had a trajectory I could sense, though not yet control. This realization unsettled me more profoundly than any doctrine or warning I had ever encountered. Humanity's collective inexperience with direct resonance, with feedback loops that bypass intellect and speak straight to existence itself, became evident. Belief alone does not prepare one for this. Doctrine cannot mediate it. Only mastery of internal coherence allows for survival when reality mirrors the self. The warning Hylos had given, once abstract and distant, was now mine to embody. And with every pulse of emotion, I felt the weight of potential collapse. Every lapse, every surge, every unmodulated reaction was now consequential. It was no longer theory. It was intensely, inescapably personal. I could no longer claim neutrality. The mirror was awake, and I was at its center. The subtle feedback had become undeniable guidance, and the lesson was clear. Internal states are no longer private, and mastery is no longer optional. What happens inside manifests outside. What I feel shapes what is. The warning had become personal, and the clock had already begun counting every heartbeat. Hylos explained it with a precision that made the enormity of the statement almost unbearable. Full disclosure: every truth that Jesus had restrained, every hidden calibration, every mechanism of consciousness that shaped reality itself, could not be released without consequence. Not because humanity lacked intelligence or curiosity, but because emotional stability is the true foundation of survival. Without it, truth becomes a detonator. Knowledge is a tool, but in untrained hands, it is a weapon. Fear amplifies exponentially when facts outrun understanding. Hope collapses under the weight of incomprehension. I began to see the patterns in history that Hylos referenced. Civilizations that had glimpsed fragments of their own power, fragments of the connection between internal state and external consequence, had erupted into chaos before mastery could emerge. Entire populations had been destabilized, belief systems shattered, and internal resonance amplified beyond containment. People with capacity too fragile, emotions too unmodulated, had become conduits for destruction. It was never about suppression. It was about containment. Truth unchecked is volatile. It is not neutral. It is active. Hylos's voice, calm yet unwavering, emphasized the magnitude of what had been withheld. Jesus had understood this instinctively, and his omissions were not failures of courage or comprehension. They were deliberate acts of preservation. Each parable, each unfinished sentence, each warning wrapped in metaphor was a shield, a way to engage the population without triggering mass resonance beyond what the system could tolerate. Humanity could only bear so much, and the thresholds were not arbitrary. They were determined by centuries of observation, experimentation, and painful consequence. The mechanics of this containment were invisible but consistent. Humans believed themselves free, autonomous, and detached from consequence, yet every unbalanced internal state projects outward. Amplified fear incites further fear. Desire propagates desire. Grief magnifies grief. Knowledge without discipline does not enlighten, it amplifies instability. And Hylos made it clear that the threshold was not distant. Humanity had approached it before and failed. And now, with technology accelerating internal states, the same dynamics were compressing into unprecedented speed. A revelation that Jesus had measured carefully over months and years would now cascade across continents in seconds. The potential for disruption is instantaneous, uncontainable, and widespread. I understood why Jesus had spoken cautiously. Each story, each silence, each omission was a calibrated release, a way to engage without overwhelming. Love was emphasized because it stabilized. Fear minimized because it destabilized. Emotional coherence was not abstract. It was the lens through which truth could be safely transmitted. Without that lens, disclosure is a contagion, a resonance that propagates unpredictably. The knowledge itself does not harm, but unbalanced humans do. Hylos's explanation left a chill I could feel in my chest. Humanity is not unready because of ignorance. It is unready because readiness requires mastery of self first. Revelation without preparation is catastrophic. Every hidden layer, every incomplete teaching, every restraint Jesus observed was not to deceive or control, but to prevent collapse. The very structure of civilization depends on it. Full disclosure would fracture society because humans are not yet capable of holding the weight of truth without fracturing the internal harmony necessary to bear it. And I began to feel the immensity of what it means to be emotionally capable, a requirement far older, far heavier than belief tradition, or knowledge could ever convey. It became undeniable that the warning Jesus left behind was not about fire, brimstone, or celestial judgment. Hylos emphasized that the danger was internal, not external. Humanity's vulnerability lay in misalignment, the subtle fractures within collective consciousness that propagate outward, unseen until they erupt. Every empire, every societal collapse, every cycle of fear-driven chaos was traced back not to moral failing, but to resonance gone awry. The inner world shapes the outer world. The measure of civilization is not its walls, its armies, its laws. It is the coherence of its inhabitants. Cade realized that the parables, the repeated insistence on love, on patience, on attentiveness, were not moral instructions in the traditional sense. They were calibrations. They were protocols encoded in story, rhythm, and repetition to guide internal states. Misalignment, the kind humans rarely notice, accelerates collapse exponentially. Fear becomes contagious. Grief amplifies. Desire distorts. Individual instability does not remain confined. It leaks, intertwines, creates feedback loops too complex for superficial governance to control. Jesus' warning was about tuning, about emotional and cognitive coherence, not punishment for sin. Hylos explained that the modern acceleration of information and technology compresses these risks into unprecedented timeframes. Human emotion now propagates faster. Influence travels instantly, and small misalignments can cascade globally before anyone recognizes the source. Internal imbalance is contagious, and the speed of amplification leaves little room for correction. Humans think they are external actors, controlled by events, yet they are the generators of those events. Fear, confusion, desire, and expectation produce tangible shifts in reality, even without awareness. The boundaries between internal and external, thought and manifestation, belief and consequence, are porous. The warning Jesus left was subtle because the stakes are absolute. To reveal the mechanics outright would have created chaos. To leave them implicit, to encode them in practice rather than explanation, is protection. Internal coherence is not optional, it is survival. And yet, most humans drift without noticing the feedback, carrying internal chaos that leaks outward. The structures of society, the religions, the rituals, the hierarchies were scaffolding to guide without overwhelming. They were shields against acceleration, buffers against resonance gone wrong. I felt the enormity of it as personal, as inevitable. Misalignment is not abstract. It manifests in relationships, in decisions, in subtle distortions of reality that one can feel but cannot explain. Each moment of unchecked fear, each surge of unexamined desire, every unresolved grief amplifies the resonance. The apocalypse is not a distant event. It is cumulative, emergent, a reflection of the imbalance within those who inhabit the world. Humanity's true danger is never external. It is the instability each person carries, multiplied across millions. Jesus' real warning is clear only when the veil is lifted. Stabilize yourself. Align your inner state. Cultivate coherence. Not for reward, not for salvation, but for containment. Civilization itself depends on it. Misalignment is contagious, and collapse begins inside. Every omission, every unfinished teaching, every silence in Scripture is a calibration, a shield. The question is no longer whether humans understand. The question is whether they can hold themselves together when the world mirrors them in ways they cannot yet control. Internal imbalance is the true apocalypse, and it begins in the unnoticed corners of the mind and heart. Hylos spoke with a weight that pressed into the space around me, a presence both patient and inexorable. Jesus, he explained, did not fail in his teachings, nor did he conceal from whim or fear. Every omission, every unfinished sentence, every deliberate pause was a measure of protection. Silence was not absence, it was containment. Humanity's capacity to endure, to process, to integrate the truth is finite. There is a threshold beyond which knowledge becomes destabilizing, where revelation does not enlighten but shatters. The teachings were calibrated to maintain resonance, to slow the internal feedback before it could fracture reality itself. I realized that what had always seemed like restraint or subtlety was in fact urgency. Every parable, every insistence on love, every admonition against fear, every hidden pattern was a stabilizer. Not because Jesus doubted his own understanding, but because he understood the true nature of consequence. Emotional imbalance spreads faster than armies, fear propagates faster than ideas, and desire amplifies faster than law. Civilization does not collapse from scarcity or conquest. It collapses from resonance unmodulated, from internal states uncontained, from the silent chaos that leaks outward unnoticed until it is everywhere at once. Hylos explained that the rules have changed. Technology, instantaneous communication, and global interconnectedness compress the cycles that Jesus observed over decades into hours. Humanity's feedback loops are accelerating, and the protective silence that once worked is now under stress. The warnings embedded in Scripture, the careful calibrations of narrative, the intentional limitations of instruction are no longer sufficient. The veil that once absorbed the imbalance is thinning. Reality itself is straining to contain the internal chaos of billions. And every unregulated thought, every unexamined emotion, every surge of collective fear or grief now ripples across the world in ways previously unimaginable. The final revelation was not comforting. Jesus stayed silent, not because humans were ready, not because divine judgment demanded it, but because the system could no longer absorb the instability. Silence is ending. It is not a signal of permission or completion. It is a warning that the world will now respond more directly to internal states. Humans are no longer insulated. Every imbalance, every distortion, every fear, every desire, every grief, every unintegrated thought is now mirrored, magnified, and fed back into existence. The boundaries between internal and external, thought and reality, intention and consequence are dissolving. The protection is gone. The containment is failing. I felt the gravity of what Hylos revealed settle into my chest. Humanity is facing a mirror it cannot yet comprehend. The question is no longer what is true or what is hidden. It is whether humans can stabilize themselves before their own resonance breaks the world they inhabit. The silence Jesus maintained was never about obedience or belief. It was about survival. And now that silence is ending, the test begins. The truth is here. The feedback is here. The imbalance is here. And humanity must either learn to contain itself or watch the consequences manifest without mercy, without guidance, and without the shield that once allowed civilization to breathe. The weight of what was withheld falls upon the present, and every mind, every heart, every unresolved state carries the responsibility of resonance, for better or worse. The era of protective omission is over. The world will now answer to what has been ignored, what has been unexamined, and what has been allowed to fester in the unseen spaces of human consciousness.